Hello, this is R Rats at ChessDotCom. I'm here today to do a analysis of a vote chess game. This was played between Team Philippines United and active members. So let's have a look and see what happens. I want to thank everyone that stopped to look at the first one. We'll see where this series goes. Get me your games, okay? If I don't get any, I'll have to start hunting for them. Okay, so we're in a Sicilian defense. Again, I don't know all the context of this, how quick it was played, and how many people played and voted. Now, here's one of the more interesting variations of the Sicilian defense. It's been around for years. It's the Sveshnikov defense, and I annotate a lot of games in Team 45 League, and this opening keeps coming up over there. And it's been around forever. And it must still be good because it's very popular. That means black gets an equal game at least. And white tries something off the beaten path here. And normally white will play knight from B to D5, D to B5. But instead, white opts for an exchange on C6. And really, black has absolutely nothing to fear from this exchange. And let's just have a look and see what we see here. Now, any of black's preparations are now gone that he would play in the normal Sveshnikov. But really, well, look what he has. He has a nice little pawn center. Eventually, he's going to be able to play for D5. Where's white's break with the pawns? If white ever plays for F4, he's going to likely end up with an isolated E pawn. So white really doesn't have a whole lot of oomph in this position to speak of. It's basically going to be just develop the pieces and see what we can create, and maybe black will weaken himself. So it's an even game. White's not losing. His position is solid here, but he really doesn't have anything going to justify to try to play for a win. And playing for a win too early can have a lot of risks to it. We'll see those as we come to it. And here again is a peculiar move. I really against moves like this in the opening because it just wastes time. Now it's got a reason. Black has an annoying pin that white's trying to avoid, attempting to undermine E4. So this move actually goes to prevent that. But it costs a tempo. That's a tempo white could have developed a piece. White could allow doubled pawns, and if he did, he would get the bishop pair. Let's just take a look at that, for instance. Let's suppose white might... Well, you got to be careful about bishop C4 because at some point black may do the center fork trick. Knight takes E4. It does restrain D5 for a little bit, but I think knight takes E4 could be okay for black here. Bishop takes F7 check. King takes, and then knight takes. And gosh, black's going to get D5 in. He could probably do it right now, and or just wait, help his development a little bit. Play one of the standard moves is to play. Defensive formations of the center fork trick is to play G6 so the king can find haven on G7. But so already just by going into this line, white doesn't have too much. What I'm trying to do, the idea behind bishop C4 is that I want to allow black to pin. I want to show that it's not so bad, but I'm trying to find a good place to put the bishop, and I haven't found one. You could say E2, but I was trying to keep F3 open for the queen to get to. See, I'm looking at bishop B4, queen F3, and I'll just show you what I was looking at. But bishop B4 and queen F3. Now, if black takes, white takes back, and for what it's worth, he's got the bishop pair, and some lines are opening up. If black doesn't castle, white may be able to play bishop A3 here and thwart that. So it's a small price to pay for having seating the double pawns. D5 is probably premature here. White's going to take and get a check, but the check may not even amount to that much. So I was just trying to get to this position and say that although white has accepted double pawns, he's got the two bishops, and he hasn't really gained much from what he was at when he took on c6, but he's got something to play with. He's got the two bishops. That's about the best he could probably hope for. But black should be okay in that position. I'm sure he's still equal, but I can't find a good place to put this bishop, so we could put it on e2. Again, I say that runs into the problem of the double pawns. We don't get to develop the queen, so let's just allow it. And now we'll play f3 so that e4 is secure. But one drawback with that is that it puts a direct line to the white king. So black could opt for queen b6 here, with or without taking on c3 with check first, and then white can't easily castle on the king side. So it's hard to say what a good strategy for white here is, simply because he's stopped and taken that knight on c6. So what's white going to do? One thing he could do is maybe play queen f3 right here. This has some point to it. It guards this pawn, and we'll figure out what to do with this bishop later. And then if bishop b4, now we can play bishop d2. And now, if black takes on c3, white can retake with the bishop. Now this probably makes the most sense. Generally, you don't want to move your queen too early, but we've shown that if white moves his king's bishop, black should be okay. So this whole idea thwarts black from playing the whole purpose of black playing bishop b4. So he probably won't even do that. What he'll play is probably more likely bishop c5, putting it on a very nice diagonal. Now, a couple questions here. That can be double-edged. Let's just evaluate this and see what can happen. Maybe you can use this in similar Sicilian positions. What's white going to do? Now he can develop the bishop to e2 if he wants, and then prepare to castle, and the game should be even. Black is going to have some play here, though, in a second. I'll show you in a moment. But we'll consider bishop e2 as a candidate move. Also, get the bishop e3 and bishop g5. Let's consider them in turn. Okay. The idea of bishop e2 is it prepares to castle, but at some point black's going to get maybe some use on g4. Let's just have a look. Okay, d6, and if white castles, we have to consider bishop g4, and now queen d3. And I'm not sure if black's getting anything out of this, but it's just something to think about. Objectively, white is happy to trade the light squared bishops in this position simply because he has a pawn on e4, and it's on a white square, so you want to keep your bishop that's on the opposite color of your pawns, especially in the center. So I'm not sure if black's gained anything by this, but I just wanted to illustrate the possibility. If white doesn't hurry up and castle, black may be playing knight g4 and making him castle, and then queen h5, and who knows if he can get anywhere with that, or queen h4, I don't know. But black doesn't have to cooperate and play these lines. The other quiet move is just bishop e7. It avoids some of the complications that I'll show you. I'll go back to bishop c5, because another thing white can try is bishop g5, and black should be okay if white doubles his pawns, because that's something that happens in a normal Sveshnikov, and then black plays for having some pressure on the open g file. So what's white going to do here? Take or not take? Black can just continue his development with d6 and let white show what he's going to do. And if white takes, black will just take back, and his position is solid. He's controlling d5. White can't get a knight in there, and the bishop will just come to e6 next. Black will be playing bishop e6 soon, and white should be okay. Black should be okay. So anyway, point is, that someone's trying to chat to me. Okay, who wants me? Oh, just a friend's request. Okay, I'll just accept it. All right. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so let's just get back to this position. I want to discuss one other candidate move and why not to play it. I don't like bishop e3, and I kind of hinted on that earlier why. It's trading off what I consider White's better bishop here, because then his remaining bishop could end up having to defend this pawn at some point. So, at any rate, White definitely had better than a3, and I've spent a little time going over that simply because I wanted to show that I think it's just a wasted move, and White could have done much better. But they voted on it, so got to live with it. I don't know if it's theory. Couldn't tell you. Okay, so a3. Now I got to find the move here in the notes. Because one thing about ChessDotCom's interface, that all the variations I play get thrown into the PGN here in the analysis table here. So, okay, so just scroll forward. Okay, so Black played bishop c5. Okay, which is good. It's a good diagonal for the bishop to be on. And then White played bishop c4. So he's kind of one tempo behind what he could have been at. But I mentioned in the other video that sometimes playing a3 combined in positions where the bishop's on goes to c4, it provides a little haven for the bishop to drop back to. But there's a big difference in this position than the other one, and that difference happens on the square c6. In this position, there's a pawn there, so Black's going to be able to shove a d5 with tempo if the bishop stays there too long, and if not, he'll still shove d5 and lock that up. Now with a knight on c6, the idea is that the black knight goes to a5 and chases the bishop, and it no longer has to stop at b3 and get traded off. It parks itself on a2, and that bishop has a wonderful diagonal to operate on. So with the knight on c6, Black isn't as ideally primed to play d5, although it's an aim to try to play at some point in the Sicilian defense, and if Black can get d5 in, Black's done fine. So basically White's down a tempo here, and Black just continues his development and castles, and then White does this little pin, and really he's not threatening anything with it because he doesn't have control of d5. So Black just puts the question to him, says, if you take it, I'll have the bishop pair. So White retreats, and then here this kind of destroys the whole sequence, destroys the whole theory of White's trying to avoid double pawns, because now look, they're threatened. So maybe White should consider queen f3 here. Simply, well, he can't, because Black will play g5 and then take, and White's going to have to accept double pawns. So basically, White could have avoided double pawns all along, and even though White's been a tempo with a3, Black has taken an extra tempo too, so he's given it back. But now the threat of giving White double pawns exists again, something White was trying to avoid. And I already showed how that could have been avoided. But anyway, castles. And it's now or never to take, I guess, but he doesn't just yet. And actually it sits there for a couple of moves before Black actually does take, and White was willingly allowing it. But suddenly comes the thrust d5, and if you look at development, White's actually got one more piece out than Black. White's queen bishop has moved and Black's hasn't, but look at that center. I mean, to have a position like this in 12 moves, wow. White's not demonstrating anything at all. None of his pieces have really good squares. Where's the scope of any of his pieces? This bishop's pointing at a pawn. Okay, right? That's pointing at a pawn. This knight is looking at squares that are taken, and I really don't see any purpose of going to a4 because c5 is covered. If you go to e2, yeah, you're on the bishop, but where does the knight go next? So, and then of course the queens and rooks of White's don't have any open lines, so White really doesn't have any kind of decent play here at all. And meanwhile, black's active. His bishop's pinning the f pawn. It's threatening to double some pawns. This knight on f6 is attacking a pawn. This bishop has a nice long diagonal to operate on. The black queen has the d8, d5 diagonal, and black's got a much better position already. So just in a few moves, white's opening has backfired. And there's the pawn center. Now the bishop's tempoed. It's got to move. Then he goes to b3. No need to go to a2, although it's clear. And black just develops another piece with tempo. And wow, look at the board. Black's got 3 chessmen beyond the 3rd rank. White has none. And when white starts the game, he's putting a chessman on the 4th rank, his pawn. And he had several pieces on the 4th rank, and they've all been retreated or traded off. So black isn't yet winning, but he's got a comfortable lead in development and a nice positional advantage. It's just a matter now of getting the rest of the pieces developed and into play, and black's headed for a good game. Okay, so let's move on. Queen d2. And then now the rook comes into play, which is fine. And now it's hard to find a plan for white here. You know, h3 just spends a tempo and weakens his king. Well, it doesn't really spend a tempo because the bishop has to move. But what's white's plan here? As I showed earlier, he doesn't really have any active piece play. If anything, since he's going to be playing h4 later, maybe he could try it here. He does play h4. Of course, you know, one drawback with moving the h-pawn is nothing's guarding this bishop on g3. It's pinned. The pawn that looks like it's defending it isn't. As I said before, the defensive power of a pinned piece is purely imaginary. So anyway, white could have tried this now, but he didn't. So let's see what he did. Whoops. Yes. Gotta get used to this. Okay, h3. And there it is. Okay, bishop e6, and now h4. So he did it, but it just seems that he's just helped black defend his position, because the only weak spot in black's camp that white's even attempting to assault is d5, and it's well covered. So this just drove another piece to protect it. But clearly black is better here, and just watching how in a few moves his position should just get stronger. Now black says, I'm going to double your pawns, and if you're not careful, and that's exactly what's going to happen. And now if you look at it, look at the 2 black rooks. They both develop. Look at the white rooks. Well, the rook on f1 it technically is developed when it castles, but it could often get a better square, and the white rooks aren't countering. So the threat is to double the pawns, and white's got a lot of problems here. Ideally, you'd like to play a move like knight d1 and try and regroup. You want to kick the bishop out and avoid the double pawns, and then redeploy the knight into e3 maybe at some point. But like I say, there are problems here, and the problem is control of the square e4. Black's going to chop this knight off, and if it stays there defending e4, then he's going to put a knight in on e4. And that's pretty much what happens. And now black plays Zwischenzug. He doesn't necessarily have to take the pawn and allow queen takes pawn check, although that's what white's playing for. But now bishop takes e3, and you can, but you know, he could have. Let's see. No, doesn't work. Okay, never mind. Okay, bishop takes e3. Now he has to take with the pawn, and then the knight comes in, and white's in just dire straits here. c3 is hanging. Where's the queen going to go? Ideally, you want to keep it on this diagonal, but black's covered on g5 is with his knight out of the way. The queen helps support it. Okay. So, I'm not sure queen e2 is the best. Let's see. It just hangs a pawn on c3 with tempo, or allows a double pawn. That's a happy choice for black to be able to make. Maybe it should have gone to e3. You know, what's wrong with e3? On e3, it attacks a pawn for what it's worth. It defends. Well, one drawback with that is then the rook just takes on c3 with tempo. So really, white doesn't have a lot of good places to put that queen. It's a shame. It's just a shame. Okay, so queen e3. Whoops, queen e2. Okay, now I got it. Now knight takes g3, and now look at that, tripled pawns. White's up a pawn, I think, or maybe not. Let's see. He's got 6 pawns. Black has 5, but all of White's pawns are isolated, or doubled and tripled. So what a bad way. And meanwhile, Black's sitting there controlling the center. Although e5 is hanging for a moment, but not going to worry about that. Watch what happens. Just queen takes, and now the queen's covering e5, and really, the game's almost all over except for the shouting. White still has no active play whatsoever. None at all. His only hope was the line I showed early. Instead of 6a3 was to play queen f3, or of course not take on c6. But that was he was trying to avoid Black's book lines, so this is what it got him. Okay, so now the pawns start rolling, and White's looking for any kind of exchange to alleviate his position, but Black's in no hurry. He just grabs the pawn. Why undouble the white pawns when you don't have to? Okay, so then White gets rid of the queens, but even if he kept them on, he was just in a bad way. Now look at this. The king comes out into a little bit of a danger zone just to guard pawns. Okay, so look at that pawn center that we were talking about earlier. Now it's advanced. It's up to the 5th rank. Be nice to have a couple knights there sitting there, but we don't have them. Anyway, White attacks a pawn, but really, there's nothing he can really do. The pawns just keep on going, and Black just finds favorable times to make exchanges. And now look at that. Now the pawns are on the 3rd rank, and really, White is so cramped for space. What can he do? If his king moves, e2 check is deadly, and that leaves him pawn moves and rook moves, and there aren't that many of those. If he tries rook c1, Black will just double his rooks and force White to take or get off the file, and then Black just penetrates into the 7th rank and finds new threats. So White's basically lost here. He saves a pawn, but what good does it do? And now Black plays a little sneaky move. The idea is to play rook h8 and give checkmate on the back rank. I bet you saw that coming. Okay, so now b5. What else? If you don't resign, at least White's trying to get a pass pawn. His plan is a4, a5, b6, and hooray, we're going to get a pass pawn. But unfortunately, Black can get to White a lot sooner. Now that move is just deadly. There's really no reply. White should resign here, but he doesn't. He just throws his rook away, and just to stave off the disaster. Now the threat is still to come down here and check and win the other rook, or at least trade it off. If White might be able to get one back on d2, or d3, but Black has no part of that. And this just adds insult to injury. It kind of immobilizes White's pawns. He can play a4, but he can't play a5. He's going to drop the pawn on b5. And Black doesn't even have to worry about the pawn on e3. Meanwhile, this rook still has squares to come into, and it's going to do it, I think. So see, there's a4, and well, he doesn't go that way, but he sees d2 as good. So now White covers that, and Black just looks at this and says, gee, I win the ending if we trade. And White looks at this and agrees. His last hope is to do anything was his rook, and after this simple continuation, Black just wins at will. He can play rook b4, rook a3. Either one will eliminate a White pawn, and it's just a matter of bringing the king up and checkmating White. So let's just go back to the beginning and kind of see where how this all happened. E5. Now, knight b5 is the normal move here. You do have to know an awful lot of theory if you're going to play it. It's a very viable option for black to play this. As I said in the beginning, it keeps showing up. It just survived the test of time. There's some other offshoot lines of this that I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but if you're trying to get someone out of book, knight f5 is one of them. You'll have to know it. It's possible in some positions black will end up taking that knight, and then look at that, black's got a pawn center again, perhaps. You're trading a center pawn away from the center and onto the side of the board, so I don't necessarily recommend it, but it is a line that's worth looking at. Knight b3 isn't aggressive. Black should have no problem with that move, but what's the point behind it? It doesn't get tempoed with a6, but again, black should be okay. Bishop b4, and looks like black's going to double some pawns here, and white's got some of the problems he had in the other line. He could play queen f3 here and allow bishop takes e3. Just the purpose of queen f3 is you gotta hold on to that pawn, and if black takes, well, white's got the bishop pair. He's given up the double pawns. He said, I'll take those, but I'll get the bishop pair. This should still be even, but at least white has some semblance of play here. Suddenly his pieces have some scope. Like I say, the bishop can get to a3, and it's on a decent diagonal. And black doesn't have the sting of pawn d5, so what's black going to do? Probably should castle just to avoid bishop a3. Then white could play bishop c4. He could. Now knight a5 is stopped because we've got this knight on b3. Of course, the bishop is kind of loose to some possible tactics on the c-file. We've got to worry about that at the right time. But white should be okay out of this. Now white doesn't necessarily want to play bishop g5 and double up black's pawns, because that'll just give white slightly the worse bishop and give black a little solidity in the center. So anyway, there's plenty of ideas if you're trying to avoid book. There's other offshoot lines. I've just shown you a few of them. You can pull out the databases and see what other moves have been played, and look at a few positions and see what you like or don't like. And you don't have to know book. Just, are you comfortable with the position? That's the whole key. And how can you tell if you're comfortable? Well, if your pieces can get developed, you should have a chance of being comfortable. But the way the game went, black just had too many positional advantages. He was threatening d5. He was going to take on. He had chances to take on e4 a lot of times, and finally he did go to e4, even though there was no pawn there, and that was led to the decisive advantage. But anyway, this was an extremely interesting game, and I hope you enjoyed my comments on it. I look forward to making more Vote Chess videos for you in the very near future. Take care. Thanks.